Found out this morning that I tested positive for COVID. I feel fine, but obviously wanted to make sure that everyone feels safe. So I'm going to just be doing this from my home here in San Francisco over Zoom. I want to talk about how we evaluate engineering performance at Gusto. So as you all heard, I'm one of the co-founders and the CTO here at Gusto. Actually, 10 days from now, it will be our 12-year anniversary of incorporation at the company. And I've had the privilege of being the head of the engineering team for those first 12 years. And obviously have done a lot of thinking around how we evaluate performance for our engineering team. And I wanted to share with you, in a no BS way, what is it that we do and we've been doing over the past 4 years. It's worked quite well. A lot of our engineering ICs and managers, myself included, really love this framework that we've settled upon. So let's get right to it. At the heart of what we do is what we call the engineering performance axes. The engineering performance axes is a document, and it really has 4 different axes on which we independently evaluate each of our engineers. We do this twice a year, so once every 6 months. Each axis has a rating of that has 5 different possible ratings, so 1 to 5. And I'll talk a little bit of in a few slides later on how we actually do that and what that actually means. And you rate each axis independently, and then the sum of the ratings, or what we call the sum of impact, you could also think about it as the area in the polygon that it creates, ultimately is what your overall rating is for that 6-month cycle. And it's the overall rating that really matters. That the axes actually ratings don't get recorded anywhere. What we record is the overall rating. I like to think about this in my own head as sort of like a Pokemon approach. I'm a little bit older, so I didn't really grow up with Pokemon, but I had a lot of my cousins and friends, kids that did. And you know, Pokemons have sort of a characteristic list, and how strong they are at each one of those characteristics. And the size of the area of the polygon is really kind of one of the indicators of how effective or how valuable that Pokemon is. And you could have different Pokemons that have strengths in different things. When you put them together, you create a great team. And that's kind of like one of the great things about this. One of the basis of the theory of why building diverse teams is so important is because you can compose teams consisting of individuals with strengths in different areas, and collectively you create an amazing team. We use they are project impact, better engineering impact, people impact, and better organization impact. And I'll talk a little bit about what each one of these things actually mean. So project impact is really just it reflects the direct impact of the work that you as an engineering IC or an engineering manager are having on your project, your actual deliverables. If you're an engineer, if you're an IC, it's about the direct impact that you have. If you are a manager, it's about the impact of your team, your overall team, and what you're responsible for. This is our most important axes, and like all axes, we try to describe your impact in quantitative business metrics like revenue, margin, CPC, ACV. These are kind of SaaS type business metrics. You can describe your project impact in terms of changes to customer behaviors. So how has product usage changed? How has the number of customer service cases reduced over time as a result of the project that you shipped? How session duration, NPS, how those things change as a result of your work on that project. And you can also measure in terms of engineering effectiveness. How have you improved the performance of the overall system? How have you improved the bug rates, the defect rates of the overall system? These are all things that you can use to quantitatively measure project impact. The second axis is better engineering. And better engineering is really about how have you improved the overall technical systems or the tool chains that the engineers are using in a way that improves the entirety of the engineering team? So some possible metrics of this are things like, have you done stuff to improve and lower test cycle time, reducing error rates? Have you worked on technical debt? And as a result of that, are you seeing other engineers have less code rework? Have you improved the kind of overall sanity of tooling that you have in your engineering team such that your new hires actually are getting ramped up faster? These are metrics that you can use to determine if someone has had an impact on the overall engineering team. This axis becomes more and more important as you become more senior. As you become, we have a 6-level system, level 1 to level 6 in our engineering team. As you go higher and higher, there's a greater expectation that the work that you do, in addition to your project impact, you're also doing things that are going to improve the overall engineering system at large. The next axis is what we call people impact. And this is really just about how are you helping others around you become more effective? There's a wide range of activities that you could do that allow you to have impact on this axis. Things like if you are spending a lot of time interviewing for other candidates that you want to hire into the company, are you mentoring others around you? Are you coaching them? Are you providing helpful feedback, doing critiques and code reviews of other people that are around you? And so these are all things that you can be doing to just kind of just improve those around you, right? And mentorship is definitely a big part of that. So the last axis that I'll talk about is better organization impact. And better organization impact is kind of like the better engineering impact, but instead of for technical systems, it's really for the people system, the people organization of the engineering team. So if people impact is something like you are spending a lot of time interviewing, which is great to do. A good example of better organization impact could be maybe you actually worked to come up with new interview questions or improve interview questions or improve the rubric that's used for interview questions. And that improves the overall system, right? A great example of people impact is maybe you took on to mentor an intern during your summer internship program. A good example of better organization impact is maybe you actually volunteered to administer the overall internship program, or you took steps to create the internship program, right? Things like creating and driving things to improve diversity inclusion in the engineering team is a great example of better organization impact. So this is something that we absolutely want to reward in our engineering team. There's a few ways within a particular axis to describe the sort of impact that someone is having there. Again, we try to make it as quantitative as possible. And some ways to think about how to describe impact is effort, output, outcomes, and business impact. And these are actually an increasing order of preference. So you can describe something in terms of the effort that someone put in. That is really the description of the activities, how someone spent their time. So you can, for example, say in your performance write-up, if you're a manager, for someone on your team, you could say, this engineer on my team was the lead contributor to Gusto's next generation time tracking product. And that's an example of something that is more in that effort bucket. Like they were the lead. That's actually a really, really good thing. A little bit better than that, if you can, is to describe the outputs. And really what that is what did they actually produce during this period? An example of that is this engineer actually shipped this cycle the next generation Gusto time tracking product. That's a lot better and a lot stronger of a claim than if you say just someone led it, right? Because you could be a lead of something. That's great, but you could also have been a terrible lead. And the same, I would say, to shipping too, right? It's great to ship something, and maybe it was really difficult because it was a really complex project. But it doesn't also necessarily mean that what you ship is good or not, right? Maybe it actually caused a lot of bugs that are causing some customer frustration. So even better than output is what we call customer outcomes. And this is really a description of how the customer benefited from the work that was done. So you can, for example, say, this engineer, they actually reduce the time that a customer takes to enter hours in because of our next generation time tracking product by 30%. And that's really awesome. And that's actually kind of our preference, because like you're able to describe the impact that someone had in a particular axis by framing it in terms of the benefit that the customer had. And that's what we really, really like to see. The downside of doing this is that, of course, it sometimes can take more time to get those measurements of customer outcomes. You may work for 6 months to ship the next generation time tracking product, and it may take another 3 or 6 months after that to get enough usage of customers on this new time tracking product to be able to definitively say that it's had this customer impact. And so the downside is going to be that as you go, from effort to output to outcomes to business impact, it takes longer and longer. And so there's a natural tension that happens there, because typically, an engineer does something great, they want to see that they got credit for it, right, as soon as possible. And if we have more time later, maybe there's a 102 version of this talk, I could talk about how we try to think about managing that tension. The final way to describe impact is the business impact. And this is really a description of how your business benefited from the work that was done. So maybe you actually were able to find that churn has decreased by a certain amount, 50%, let's say, because of the next generation time tracking product. People are that much happier about it. That would be the ultimate way to describe someone's outcomes. It's really kind of indisputable that you had really good impact if you can describe it in that way. So all of these are completely valid ways to describe impact. There's not one that we say you must use and one that we say you cannot use. We're open to letting managers use any of these things to describe impact, but just knowing that they have their pros and cons. So let's talk about the actual ratings. I mentioned earlier that we have 5 different ratings for each of those axes. And these are the ratings that we use. It's not meeting expectations, sometimes meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, and then Gusto exemplar. This is the 5-point rating. And you can see on the right, I've put in what is Gusto's sort of expected distribution of what we typically want to see in organizations of sufficient size, of like how frequently this should come up. It's important to note that these are not forced distributions, and we don't stack rank, we don't force distributions or anything like that. But when you have an org of a sufficient size, you will start to see normal distribution patterns. And if you're not, it's possible that everyone is an exemplar, or it's possible that everyone is a sometimes meeting. But more than likely, what it means is that the way you're thinking about each of these ratings is not quite right, and it's worth a deep dive. And so that's kind of a very nuanced thing that comes with kind of publishing one of these expected distributions of each of these ratings. And of course, depending on the level that you're at, what it means to be at one of these ratings is completely different. If you're in an L1, and what we say is meeting expectations is obviously very, very different than if you're an L6 in the company and meeting expectations. And so everything is kind of normalized to the level that you're at. Okay, so I want to just give a quick example of what you'll see in one of our engineering performance axes documents. So for every axis and for every level, we have one of these tables. And it really describes what someone at this level will typically look like for having an impact in a particular axis. So this is the L3 requirements for the project impact axes. So we have 24 of these tables, because we have 4 axes and we have 6 levels at Gusto. So 4 times 6 is 24. We have 24 of these tables, and it really describes in detail what someone at that level might look like if for impact in that particular axis. So I just want to share that as an example. So let's put it all together. Here's what an example write-up will look like when we get to our performance review season. So this is a fictitious engineer, Skylar. We typically like to have our managers write it in this format. One line of some context, what team they're on, what level they are at, how long they've been at Gusto, and how long they've been in that particular team. And then 4 bullet points, one for each axis. It includes the rating, and then a short description of what they did in that axis that led you to give that rating. And in this case, this was exceeds, meets for the project, better engineering, people, and better organization axes respectively. And it led to an overall rating of exceeds expectations. There's no formula of like, you need 2 exceeds or the area in that polygon needs to be above or below a certain amount in order for you to get a certain overall rating. It's really kind of just, you use your discretion at the end of the day. Obviously, if someone sometimes meets on all 4 axes, you're not going to give them an exceeds. But in this case, you might look at it all together and say, this feels overall like an exceeds. And I think that's really important. Like, I think what I see a lot of engineering teams do, they try to get too mathematical and quantitative about this. But the reality is performance is a mixture of qualitative and quantitative measurements, and you have to use your judgment in there as well. And so this allows space for that judgment. The last thing I wanted to mention is this concept called required axes. So required axes is that for certain levels, some axes are actually required to be met. You need to be a meets expectations in that axis in order for the other axes to sort of like kick in. So put it another way is if you get a sometimes meets in a axis that is required, the max rating that you can get overall is sometimes meets, no matter what. You can't get above sometimes meets if you don't. Sorry, you can't. You can only get a sometimes meets if you get a sometimes meets in a required axis. And that seems a little harsh, but I'll try to explain why that's the case. But first, let me explain what is our required axes at Gusto. So project impact is required for everybody. No matter what level you're at, you have to have project impact. And this is the most important axes. Better engineering impact is required for all managers, engineering managers, and they're required for all ICs that are L5 and above. Once you get to L5 and above, we want you to be spending time to improve the overall engineering system. And this becomes a requirement of you starting at L5. People impact is required for all managers. Hopefully that's self-explanatory why that is the case. And once you get to L5 and above, better organization impact becomes the required axes. Okay, I'm going to end on 2 last things, and then we'll have some, I think maybe some time for a few Q&As. So calibrations. Calibrations are really calibrating the manager, not the employee. It's meant to ensure that managers are assessing performance in the same way. And the ideal state is that all managers are giving the same rating for the same actual performance, whether they're on their team or not. The way we do calibrations is we get all the managers in a room and we have them share their write-up. We allow maximum 2 minutes for everyone to read that write-up, and it's a good forcing function to force conciseness in that write-up. And then 3-minute discussion for each employee, and then that's how we calibrate. The last thing I'll talk about is how we do promotions. So once you have a good calibration system like this, doing promotions is actually pretty straightforward. Let's say you have an L2 that wants to go for promotion for L3. What we'll do is we'll calibrate that L2 with other L2s, figure out what their rating is at that L2 level. And then when we start to calibrate all the L3s, we actually will calibrate that L2 with all the L3s. If they calibrate sort of like in the middle of the path, they're kind of a meets expectations and they're kind of in the middle of the meets or at least that or above, then they're promoted. It's as simple as that. If they're not promoted, the manager will, of course, give very clear feedback on what was missing. And this logically makes sense because if you're promoting someone that's lower than the middle of the pack, like maybe you're promoting someone once they're kind of in the bottom quartile of that next level, then what that's going to happen to your level over time is you're going to dilute and lower the bar for that level. So you need to have it at least such that they calibrate at the middle of the pack or above. And that's how you at least keep the bar consistent, or you can consistently try to raise the bar of any given level. So that's it. That's how we do performance management at Gusto. Hopefully it was really helpful and non-BSy. Happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you. And thank you for pulling yourself together. I know having COVID is a good excuse to just veg out. So thank you for your commitment to being here today. All right, so we are using...
I know, I was very excited.
Good. We are using Slido, and we have 2 so far, and I know we've had some Wi-Fi lag going on, so we may need to take live questions from the audience. But let's start with these 2. What is the puppy's name in the background painting?
That's a great question. And she's back here somewhere too. Puppy's name is Omo, O-M-O. And she's a awesome and cute Pomeranian that we have. She's 10 years old. I'm Korean, Omo. If you're Korean, Koreans will say Omo, which means like, it's kind of like our expression for when you say here in the US, oh my God. And so the dog's name basically means, oh my God.
That is adorable. All right. Okay, next question. How do you think of quantifying performance as reducing an individual's contributions to too few dimensions? How do you think of quantifying performance as reducing an individual's contributions to too few dimensions?
Yeah, so even though there's only 4 dimensions to this, it covers pretty much everything that an engineer will do. And so I haven't found a case where they do something that's impactful for the company, and then it wasn't able to fit in one of these 4 axes. And it's because each of these 4 axes are defined quite broadly. One thing that we're constantly iterating on this. Every year we do our review cycle, and then we ask for feedback on how we can get better at this. And we'll do a refresh every now and then. We actually just published a refresh. But one of the things that actually has come up is that sometimes the difference between people impact and organization impact is not always super differentiated. So one of the things that has come up as an idea is actually, do we want to kind of consolidate those 2 together and just kind of make it an Uber axis around kind of overall people impact, of which organization is a part of. So, yeah, I mean, I think I would say there's even space to reduce this from 4 axes to 3 axes, while still being fully encompassing of all the great work that engineers are doing.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I still don't see any more Slido questions, but if anybody in the audience has a question, it looks like we have one here. You want to see here?
The question that I have is about including effort in your impact. A lot of times, people just go and work on something and say, I have spent 5 sprints on this, but how do you measure the impact of the effort if there was no alignment between the people who were doing the effort to the product managers who wanted something else, or it was just like it should not be just an innovation exploration that is going on for 5 sprints, and that can be called effort. So I want to understand that aspect.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's the reason why actually, of these 4 ways to describe impact, we actually have the least preference for effort. You could spend a lot of time on something and it could be a complete waste of time, and it's not necessarily something that you want to always reward as part of one's performance. And that's why, when possible, we'd much prefer that the impact be described in terms of output, or most preferably in terms of customer outcomes. So usually in these write-ups, you will see more on the output, outcomes, and impact, and less on the effort. Effort is okay. It's not like we outlaw it, because sometimes projects are large enough that you do want to consider the effort that was put in. But I think, as you point out, there's a lot of pitfalls to that, and just measuring, how long someone spends on something. So yeah, I think you point out, and we agree on the pitfalls of using effort.
All right, I think we have another question over here.
Hi, Eddie. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm amazed that we have both a system with 4 axes. But I was a bit surprised that in my system, basically, that's business execution, people, and system. And so execution is really your project axis, your project impact axis. People is your people axis, so no surprise there. And system, for me, is a combination of your 2 axes that are better engineering and org impact, because I see that really related. And so my 4th axis is business. That means knowledge of the industry, knowledge of the business, knowledge of why we are doing this. That's what is the value of doing those things. Are you factoring that knowledge of the industry, that knowledge of the context in which we are doing things in your axis?
So first of all, I think that's pretty awesome and really cool that we have kind of a similar system, and they're sort of small variants of each other. I personally see the business knowledge as an important part of how you have impact on the other axes. The business knowledge itself, in my opinion, is not itself of value to the company. It's really kind of how you use that business knowledge and how it manifests in the projects that you deliver, the system improvements that you make, the mentorship you give others, and those show up in those axes. So of course, if you don't have the business knowledge, then I think your impact on these other axes are not going to be particularly strong.
All right, I'm actually going to see if there's anybody in the back that has a question, just because you guys are so patient. There's a gentleman right here in the middle. Just you. Yes, you.
Hey there. Testing. Oh. Hey, thanks for the presentation. Actually, I have 2 questions. One is, do you use the 9-box performance and potential matrix? And the second question is, do you tie the performance to individual or team-based OKRs?
Both great questions. So yeah, we use 9-box as well. I see 9-box as a way that's we use 9-box a little bit more for talent planning and less for performance. So what I just described here is more meant to be backwards looking of the last review cycle and how they did, and you're kind of more looking backwards. The 9-box I see is a little bit more forward looking, where you're kind of seeing for each individual in your team where their performance and potential is, and like what you want to do with that for the next 6 months, and then also where are the gaps that you see in your overall team composition, and where do you need to go higher for the next 6 months. So I think it's really healthy and good to actually pair those 2 things together, the performance review process, which is more backwards looking, and then the 9-box, which is a little bit more forward looking. Sorry, remind me of your second question.
Do you tie it to OKR performance?
Team performance, yeah. So some teams will actually, before they start having their managers write up their performance evals, they will get together and sort of rate the performance of the team, right? Which really also comes down to like, how did you do to the OKRs? And you have teams that have performed really well as a team, and then you have teams that struggled a bit as a team, and that can be used to sort of help guide what the individual ratings. It's one of the inputs that could be used for individual ratings. For a team that's performed really well on their OKRs and as a team, you might actually see a higher skewing of ratings than the normal distribution that I shared. And for a team that really struggled on their OKRs, you might see like slightly lower skewed ratings on their performance ratings. So I think it's a good way to kind of inform and really just kind of gut check: is the rating distribution that you're seeing in your individuals, does it make sense?
Thank you, Eddie. That's all the time we have, except I have been asking all of our speakers one common question, which is, what do you enjoy so much that you completely lose track of time?
I'm an engineer at heart, and so when I'm coding, I will lose track of time. I'll forget to eat, and do all basic necessity things. Like my life becomes a mess when I start coding because I just lose track of time so quickly.
You're not the first person to say that, so glad to hear it. All right, thank you, Eddie. I hope you have a speedy recovery.